She was supposed to be invisible, just another mechanic on the flight line, wiping down cockpits she'd never sit in. But when a top-tier F-22 pilot called her name over encrypted military radio mid-crisis, the entire base froze. Who was Carol Trezza, and how did a woman rejected from flight school end up becoming the most trusted mind in the skies without ever leaving the ground? What happens when skill can no longer be ignored? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story just might change the way you see unsung heroes forever. Carol Trezza tightened the final bolt on the F-22's engine housing, the torque wrench slipping slightly as a smear of oil cut across her wrist. She didn't wipe it. It was the third Raptor she'd worked on since dawn, and her coveralls, standard issue, faded gray, sleeves rolled up, were already soaked through with sweat and turbine grime. The others had knocked off hours ago, but Carol never left early. She preferred the silence. That was when she could actually hear herself think. She lowered the wrench, placed it back into the red toolbox with its latch that didn't close all the way, and stood to her full 5'4". A smear of grease ran across her cheekbone like war paint, though she didn't know it yet. She didn't look in mirrors much anymore, not since the letter. Not since the rejection. You know, Carol, if you baby that jet anymore, the thing's gonna imprint on you, Noah Briggs called from across the hangar, leaning against a support beam like he always did when he was bored. He was holding a clipboard he didn't need and a pen he'd never use. She didn't look up. Better to baby a Raptor than blow a hydraulic seal because someone rushed an inspection. Briggs chuckled. Touche. He didn't hate her, not really. His jabs were more habit than hostility now, but they used to bite. A few years back, they stung enough that she nearly requested a transfer. Now it was just air. Noise behind the quiet hum of her purpose. You ever think maybe the Air Force had a reason to say no? He added, not as a joke this time. Flight school's no joke, Carol. It's not just about knowing the tech. She paused, carefully closed the access panel on the Raptor's wing, then turned around slowly. Her eyes met his. Calm. Cool. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. They told me I was too small to handle the G-forces and emotionally unsuited for the demands of combat aviation. Briggs shifted. I didn't mean. I know what you meant, she cut in. And I think they were wrong. She walked past him, her boots echoing across the vast concrete floor of Dawson Air Base Hangar 6. Her shift wasn't technically over yet, but her work was done, and she'd said more in 30 seconds than she had to Briggs all week. Back in her quarters, a converted storage unit repurposed into off-base housing. Carol stripped off the coveralls, cleaned her face with a wet rag, and sat down at her desk. There were no posters, no decorations, just flight manuals, airspeed charts, a coffee mug with chipped blue paint, and her rig. It didn't look like much, just a mid-level gaming tower she'd built herself, a HOTAS throttle and stick, and a headset worn smooth along the ear pads, but to her, it was freedom. It was altitude. Carol wasn't Carol here. Online, she was Valkyrie. Her call sign wasn't chosen, it was earned. One night in a multi-branch simulated dogfight scenario, she executed a dive-roll-scissor combo so precise that the Air Guard lieutenant on the other end of the match wrote one word in the debrief chat: Valkyrie. She kept it. In the digital skies, Valkyrie was legend. No one knew who she was, and she never talked much. But when her name appeared in a lobby, pilots logged on with the same mixture of dread and awe. She'd gone up against former Top Gun instructors, foreign allies, even a few hotshot West Point grads. They fell one by one, but no one, absolutely no one, knew she was a civilian aircraft maintenance tech who couldn't even get a cockpit slot. As the sim loaded, she flexed her fingers and stared ahead at the monitor, the blue glow flickering across her face. She wasn't flying for ego. She wasn't flying to prove anything to Briggs or to the Air Force board that dismissed her. She flew because something in her came alive up there. Even if up there was just code and pixels, it was her cathedral, and no one could take it from her. She entered the match quietly, checking her weapon loadouts, ping latency, and HUD display. A name appeared in the lobby, Ghost_7. Her stomach flipped, but only slightly. Ghost was fast. Ghost was good. Their record was 4-3 in her favor. Every dogfight with him was a test. Whoever he was, he knew real tactics, not game theory nonsense. He flew like someone who'd felt Mach speeds for real. Tonight's scenario: Arctic scramble, heavy wind interference, multiple bogeys, live comms optional. She clicked accept without hesitation. Over the next 40 minutes, the world disappeared. Carol flew like she breathed, each movement instinctive, almost meditative. At one point, she countered a thrust vector turn so clean that Ghost dropped below radar for a full 5 seconds, then reappeared dead center in her gun sight. Ping, 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 kill confirmed. Ghost didn't message. He never did. But this time, a voice came through comms. His last roll, you pulled that out of a Hornet handbook from 20 years ago. Carol froze. She never used her mic. Never. Accurate, she replied, her voice steady, even. But I refined the timing. Silence for a beat. Then, you Valkyrie? She hesitated. Depends who's asking. I'm Ghost. Another pause. You fly like someone who's been in the seat. She couldn't help it. She let a small smile break across her lips. I've been in the cockpit more times than I can count. Just not in the way you think. Why'd you train? I didn't. Then, as if he understood more than he let on, Ghost replied, You ever been to Dawson? Carol blinked. Her hands trembled on the joystick. I worked there. Now it was Ghost's turn to go silent. But when he came back, his voice was different. Not amused. Not impressed. Curious. I'm based at Dawson. Just like that, the match ended. Carol stared at the blank screen long after it returned to the lobby. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with competition. Whoever Ghost was, he wasn't just a player. He was someone inside. The next morning, she was back on the flight line, working on the same Raptors she'd touched the day before. The same bolts, the same panels. Nothing looked different, but everything felt it. Because 30,000 feet above her head, someone who knew the sky, really knew it, had spoken to her like she belonged there. And for the first time in a long while, Carol Trezza didn't just hope. She believed. Carol couldn't sleep. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. in soft red numerals, the hum of the base's generators vibrating faintly through the concrete walls. Outside, the hum of a late transport plane shook the air for a few seconds before fading back into stillness. She lay in bed, fully awake, one hand resting on her chest, feeling her heart beat with a sharpness she didn't recognize. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Ghost was real. Not just a username or a clever avatar. Not a theory on a message board. He was flesh and bone and stationed here, at Dawson. Somewhere behind a cockpit visor or a command center screen, he was breathing the same dust she was, walking the same tarmac. And he knew who she was now. Not Carol. Not the mechanic with busted knuckles and an invisible flight record. Valkyrie. She sat up and swung her legs out of bed, the cool floor jolting her into motion. The rig still glowed faintly in the corner, idle now, but waiting. She considered logging back in just to see if he was still there, but no. That wasn't what tonight needed. Carol grabbed a hoodie, slipped on her boots, and left her room, the door whispering shut behind her. The air was sharp and clean, cooler than usual for a southern base. She walked across the lot, past rows of quiet trucks and crates and covered equipment, heading toward Hangar 3. She wasn't on duty, no one had called her, but this was the only place she could think. The Raptors sat like sleeping beasts under the floodlights. Their sleek forms were cloaked in partial shadow, motionless but still humming with potential. Carol leaned against one of the metal pylons and closed her eyes. She'd memorized every line of those aircraft, every system, every vulnerability. She could tell you the stress tolerances on the right aileron after 300 flight hours or the exact delay calibration for its missile locking sequence. But what she wanted, what she craved, was the stick, the canopy, the weight of gravity fighting her as she pulled a turn into the blue. She'd never asked for pity, never told her full story to anyone, not even Dana. Her sister thought Carol had moved on from the flight school rejection, had made peace with the hangar life. In some ways, Carol had made it seem that way on purpose. What was the point in dragging others into a dead dream? Except it wasn't dead. It had only changed altitude. A sudden voice cut through the night, startling her. "Can't sleep either?" Carol turned, instantly recognizing the silhouette of Lieutenant Col Monroe. His posture was unmistakable, upright, coiled, like a man always seconds away from action. She straightened. "Didn't think anyone else came out here this late, sir." Monroe approached, not in a hurry, his eyes scanning the Raptors as he came. "Old habits. I used to walk the flight line before missions back in the day. Now I do it when I can't figure people out." Carol blinked. "People, sir?" He looked at her now, and though his tone remained casual, his gaze was direct. "I've been hearing things." Her chest tightened slightly. "Good things or bad?" He didn't smile. "Interesting things." Monroe let the words hang in the air, long enough for them to gain weight. "Ghost_7," he said finally. "That's me." She didn't speak. Wanted to see if the rumors were true. Valkyrie's been tearing up the DoD sim network for a couple years. Nobody could match your flying, not even the seasoned pilots. There were discussions, speculation. Some thought you were a test AI program gone rogue. Others figured you were just someone playing on a hacked sim. But last night, when you said you worked here, well, that narrowed the field. Carol stared at the ground, her foot unconsciously tracing a groove in the concrete. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. Monroe shook his head. "It's not trouble, Trezza. It's talent." That made her look up. "I watched your logs," he continued. "Not just last night. Before that, too. You don't just win. You teach. Every time a pilot fails to tag you, you adjust. You correct. It's like watching a tactician run drills in real time." She swallowed hard. "Then why does the real Air Force think I'm not fit to fly?" He considered her for a long moment. "Because the system was built to favor a very specific mold. Right school, right posture, right leadership evaluations. You didn't check every box, so they didn't open the door. But you think I should have gone through that door?" "I think," Monroe said, walking past her now, "that it's a shame we let someone like you sit on the sidelines. And I'm not the only one." He stopped, turned back. "There's a training operation next week, advanced sim work. Usually we don't invite civilians or non-MP staff, but I'm making an exception. Not because of politics, not even because of Ghost, but because I've never seen a mind like yours fly." Carol's breath caught in her chest. "What kind of sim?" "Live drills. Command-to-pilot interface, real-time response, adversarial scenario. You won't be in the air, but you'll be calling the moves." She frowned. "Like mission control?" "Exactly like that." She hesitated. "Why me?" Monroe smiled slightly. "Because I want my pilots to survive. And you're the only one who's outflown them all." He walked off, his footsteps echoing through the hangar. Carol stood alone, staring at the Raptors again. But now they looked different. Not like fantasies. Not like impossible dreams. They looked like challenges. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. Her mind ran scenarios again and again. Routes, escape vectors, wingmen formations. She rewatched old logs, replayed old matches, even messaged one of the forum admins to confirm Valkyrie's kill-hath ratio. It was higher than she remembered. Admin watched. The next few days passed in a blur. She still reported for maintenance, still took orders, but everything underneath her skin buzzed with something electric. It was like having an audition no one knew was happening. She reviewed her own strategies, reworked digital simulations, programmed her own scripts to test reaction times. If they were going to give her a seat, any seat, she was going to own it. 3 nights before the operation, she received an encrypted message on her SIM profile. It was from an internal Air Force server. No name, just a line of text. "We don't know who you are, but we've all learned from you. If this is your moment, make it count." Carol stared at the screen, heart pounding. For so long she'd flown invisible, anonymous, alone. Now someone was watching. Someone was listening, and she had no intention of backing down. The pilots called it Hell Week, but for Carol, it was heaven. 5 straight days of emergency response drills at Dawson Air Base meant every aircraft, every pilot, and every technician was stretched to the limit. Simulated engine failures, navigation breakdowns, and in-flight emergencies were rehearsed again and again to the point of exhaustion. From her station on the edge of the tarmac, Carol stood ready with her tools, her grease-smeared gloves, and a watchful eye that never drifted far from the sky. Officially, she was on ground support, checking diagnostics, resetting circuits, monitoring return protocols. Unofficially, she was soaking in every maneuver, every radio call, and every hiccup in the Raptor's behavior. Every takeoff was a lesson, every landing a chance to see if her predictions held true. She scribbled mental notes. Havoc oversteered on descent. Redtail took too long re-engaging thrust. Coyote's trim balance was off again. From the sidelines, she was constructing entire after-action reports in her head before the debriefs even began. And then there were the comms streamed into the operations tent, but often left unwatched. Carol had found ways to discreetly tap into them from her maintenance rig, a practice she told herself was unofficially sanctioned by years of being overlooked. Today, though, something felt different. The air was tight, the wind had shifted, even the birds that usually circled the runways had vanished from the sky. It wasn't weather. It wasn't equipment. It was instinct. She watched as Tucker Havoc Price swaggered toward his jet, helmet tucked under one arm, his grin already irritating. Havoc had a reputation, flashy in the air, careless on the ground, the kind of pilot who spent more time polishing his call sign than logging useful flight hours. But he had connections, and that mattered in places like this. He spotted her as he passed the maintenance bay and offered a mock salute. "Still playing with screwdrivers, Trezza?" he called. "Thought you'd be up in the big leagues by now. Oh, wait, forgot. They said no." Carol didn't flinch. She never did with him. It wasn't worth it. But she did glance at the checklist hanging from the clipboard he carried. Backward, the pre-flight diagnostics hadn't even been filled out. Typical. She turned away, but not before hearing one of his crew whisper something about Valkyrie behind his back. The name drifted like smoke, half myth, half mockery. Did they know? No. It was just chatter. Ghost knew, Monroe knew, but they wouldn't say anything. Still, something in her tightened. The engines roared to life minutes later. The Raptors taxied out one by one, wings gleaming under the afternoon sun, metal birds ready to slice through sky and simulation alike. Carol stood off to the side, chewing her lip. She didn't like the way Havoc's bird sounded. There was a strain in the compressor. Whine, subtle, but present. She stepped toward the tower. "Hey, does Flight Ops have full telemetry on Echo 7? She asked a controller leaning against a crate of comms gear. He shrugged. "Should. Why?" "Something's off with the harmonics. It might be nothing, but it's a drill, Trezza. They're supposed to pretend things are going wrong." She nodded, but her gut refused to settle. There were drills, and then there were screw-ups waiting to unfold. Back in the operations tent, screens flickered with flight data. One large monitor showed the airspace grid, raptors as glowing dots tracking altitude, speed, and location. A timer counted down. Exercise access. 0:17 and 43 seconds. She stepped behind the back table, pretending to adjust a cable as she leaned closer to the comms terminal. The headset still hung there, unused. The pilot's voices buzzed through coded, calm, professional. Coyote 1, altitude 10.3, vectoring north by northwest. Red tail. Engine cycle stabilized. Initiating roll. Echo 7, adjusting trim, minor yaw drift. That last one. Echo 7, Havoc. Carol pressed the headset closer. Echo 7, reading mild instability in port-high airflow, adjusting trim manually. Her eyes narrowed. The manual trim adjustments mid-sim? Why not auto-compensate? It didn't add up. She reached over to the control panel, brought up the telemetry feed, and called up Echo 7's real-time data. The port side stabilizer was pulling 4% harder than starboard, which meant lateral drag. A mild drift, but in the wrong conditions it could spiral fast. Then the static hit. A shriek across the comms line, followed by, "Echo 7 Mayday. Controls unresponsive, trying to compensate. Pitch negative." Jesus. Carol's stomach dropped. She didn't wait. Slipping the headset fully on, she grabbed the mic and tapped into the encrypted direct line. "Echo 7, this is Maintenance Tech Trezza. You're falling below trim envelope. Cut manual compensation and engage tertiary flight assist now." There was no response. The room buzzed with confusion. One of the officers reached for his radio, startled. Who the hell just patched in? But then Havoc's voice came back. "Trezza. What the hell? How do you—" "No time. You've got 2,000 feet and dropping. Your jet's fighting your inputs. Flip the FAS override switch under the left side throttle. Now." A beat of silence. Then, override engaged. Okay, flight control stabilized. Trim's balancing, climbing back." A breath finally escaped her lungs. She turned to find 3 flight officers staring at her like she'd grown a second head. One of them, Helt Jordan, stepped forward. "How did you know that override protocol?" "That's buried in classified flight system subdocuments." Carol stared at the headset in her hands. Her voice came out steady. Another voice entered the room, gravel, calm, commanding. "T. Call Monroe." He looked from the paused simulation screens to the still flashing telemetry on Echo 7, then back to Carol. "She didn't just read," he said. "She predicted it. She saved a pilot who had 10 seconds left before metal hit dirt." Carol shifted slightly, aware that every eye in the room was on her now. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't built for this kind of attention. Monroe stepped forward. "I want her in the next scenario. Not behind a toolbox. Behind the comms. Live." Jordan blinked. "She's a mechanic." "No," Monroe replied. "She's a tactician." The other officers didn't argue. How could they? She had just done something that even experienced flight controllers missed. And she didn't hesitate. Back outside, the Raptor landed safely. Havoc climbed out, visibly shaken, helmet tucked under his arm. He spotted her by the hangar. "You," he said, approaching, face taut. "You were Valkyrie, weren't you?" That was you last night, on the sim." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He stepped closer. He stopped. "You saved my ass." For once, the grin was gone. Carol didn't smile. "Maybe next time, check your trim before you launch." He gave a single, almost reverent nod, then walked off. She stood alone again, but not invisible, not anymore. Tomorrow she wouldn't be watching from the edge. Tomorrow she'd have a seat at the table. The tower was silent. It wasn't the usual, focused kind of silence that settled over during live drills. This was heavier, thicker. Carol stood behind the console, headset resting over her ears, her voice comms still open, blinking. In front of her, the screen displayed telemetry from Echo 7, real-time altitude, airspeed, weapon status. The Raptor was steady now, gliding above 30,000 feet in a soft, banking curve across the eastern perimeter. But the silence wasn't about the plane. It was about what had just been said. "Valkyrie, Carol," the words still echoed across the encrypted comms line. Not shouted, not panicked, spoken softly. As if he weren't even fully aware the mic was hot. As if it slipped out on instinct, like a whisper meant for someone who wasn't supposed to exist in this world at all. It hadn't come from the control tower. It hadn't come from anyone in the command center. It had come from the cockpit. Inside Echo 7, Tucker Havoc Price was breaking every regulation by speaking off-screen, mid-mission, on an active channel. But no one corrected him. No one moved. The entire room froze the moment he spoke her name. Across the board, red lights flicked to yellow, signaling transition into low-stress flight mode. Simulated threats had been cleared. The mission was nearly done. The drama should have faded into checklists and routine. But this wasn't routine anymore. Carol didn't flinch. Her hand hovered just above the mic key, unsure whether to answer. She didn't even know what to say. She had never intended to be known. Behind her, a chair creaked as Monroe leaned forward. Did he just say, "Yeah"? Jordan replied before Monroe could finish. He did. Another officer muttered. He ID'd her by her SIM handle. Carol slowly pulled off her headset and placed it on the desk. It felt heavier now, as if carrying the weight of what had just passed through it. Monroe rose from his seat, everyone out. A beat passed. Jordan frowned. "Sir? You heard me. This is over for today. Debrief later. Clear the room." One by one, the controllers and officers filed out, murmuring and glancing back at Carol, as if she'd transformed in front of them. As if they'd known her for years, yet never really saw her. When the last technician stepped through the door and let it close behind him, Monroe turned toward her, hands on his hips. "You didn't tell me he knew." "I didn't know," she said quietly. "You sure?" She nodded. "I believe you," Monroe said after a pause. "But now the rest of the base knows too." Nation. Said my name like it meant something. It does mean something. There was a weight to his voice, the way he said it. Not like a superior giving comfort, like a man who'd finally solved a riddle, only to find a deeper one underneath. Monroe pulled out a chair and sat, waving for her to do the same. She hesitated, then followed. "You've been Valkyrie for what, 3 years? And closer to 4? And no one ever connected it back to you? Not officially. And unofficially?" She paused. Ghost might have suspected. His eyebrow twitched. "Ghost? You think that was me?" Carol looked him in the eye. "Wasn't it?" He didn't answer right away, just offered a crooked half-smile and leaned back in his chair. "You're damn good," he said. "Too good. That override you called? I had to check the manual myself afterward, just to be sure it existed. I haven't seen someone command an aircraft like that without ever leaving the ground." "I read," she said again. "Don't be cute. You read, you fly, you teach by example. Half the things you pulled in those simulations have ended up in actual training debriefs. Her brow creased. They've been using my footage. Monroe nodded. Unattributed. Quietly. Some of the instructors thought you were Black Ops or AI. But when Ghost started losing matches, and you started adjusting his tactics before he could finish executing them, that's when people paid attention. And now, he tapped the screen in front of her. You've crossed the final threshold. Because someone said my name? Because the wrong person said the right name. Now there's heat. And eyes. Let them look. Monroe studied her. I've seen people cave under less. I've been invisible most of my adult life, she replied. You think a little attention is going to scare me? His grin widened slightly. That's what I needed to hear. Outside, the shriek of landing gear tore through the stillness as Havoc's jet descended onto the strip. Carol didn't move to go meet him. She didn't need to. He's not the type to keep quiet, Monroe said, reading her silence. I know. You might try to take credit, twist the narrative, say he let you help him. Then I'll beat him again, she said, in front of witnesses this time. Monroe stood, satisfied. There's a closed-door strategy assessment tomorrow morning. The same people who greenlight pilot candidates sit in. They want to review advanced simulation oversight. I already put your name on the docket. I'm not a candidate, she said. Not yet, he replied. But if I had to bet money on one person who could turn that room upside down, it's you. She stayed after he left. Sat alone in the dim command center, screen still humming softly. The room had cleared, but something lingered in the air. Not tension. Not fear. Legitimacy. It was the first time she felt it outside the sim. She stared again at the headset. Valkyrie. Carol. The way he'd said it haunted her. Not in fear, but in awe. Like someone seeing a ghost and realizing it was a person all along. Someone real. By the time she walked out into the fading light of the evening, Havoc was waiting for her near the hangar doors. His arms were crossed, flight suit half undone, hair still wet with sweat. Bosch waited at the hangar as Havoc moved to talk with him. You played me. She kept walking. I mean it, he said, falling into step beside her. You made me look like an amateur, and I've got 10,000 hours in that seat. You made yourself look like an amateur, she replied without slowing. I just called what I saw. He huffed a laugh. You always this cold? She stopped, then turned toward him. No. I used to be warm, then people like you handed me rejection letters and told me I wasn't pilot material. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't with sarcasm, just quiet honesty. You saved my life. I saved your aircraft. You saved both. Carol looked at him. For the first time, he wasn't a caricature of arrogance. He was just a man who realized he was no longer the best person in the room. He extended a hand. I won't forget it. She didn't take it. Instead, she said, just don't screw it up next time. And with that, she walked away. That night, Valkyrie didn't log in. She didn't need the simulation. Tomorrow, she'd face the real-world gauntlet. One made of rank, power, and politics. And this time she wasn't entering it as a ghost. She was entering it as herself. The conference room didn't have windows, just beige walls, a polished table, and a line of Air Force brass sitting like a tribunal along one side. Their nameplates were neatly spaced. Cole Whitmore, Mage, Driscoll, Elliton Ginn, Harmon, a few others Carol didn't recognize, though she'd heard their voices before. Recorded lectures, instructional videos, flight safety briefings. She'd studied them all. And now they were all staring back at her. She stood near the far end of the room, alone, hands behind her back, like she was awaiting judgment. In a way, she was. Monroe stood beside her, arms folded. Unlike the others, he didn't sit. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to command respect, and his silence made them lean in. "Let's start with the basics," Cole Whitmore said, folding his hands together. Carol Trezza, civilian, maintenance technician, Dawson Air Base. No flight certification, no formal combat training, no simulator clearance. He let the words linger like a charge sheet. "And yet," added Maj, Driscoll, flipping open a folder, "we have logs here of a user operating under the call sign Valkyrie, originating from this base, using secure channels, competing in top-tier simulations against active-duty pilots, including those with overseas deployment experience." He looked up. "That's you, correct?" "Yes, sir." No stammer, no hesitation. Her voice was steady, clear. She wasn't here to hide anymore. "Helton Jen." Harmon raised an eyebrow. "I reviewed your override call on Echo 7 yesterday. You were not authorized to speak on that comm channel." "No, sir." "You did it anyway." "Yes, sir." "And you saved the pilot." She nodded once. Silence again. Monroe finally spoke. "Oath to respect, gentlemen. What she did wasn't just a lucky call. Trezza recognized a cascade failure from auditory engine strain alone. She deduced lateral drag from real-time telemetry in under 6 seconds, cross-referenced override commands stored in Level 3 classified maintenance logs, and delivered instructions under pressure that kept an F-22 and its pilot out of a crater. He let that settle. "She's been training your pilots through simulation for years," he continued, voice rising just slightly. "And you've been using her tactics in flight schools and squad briefings without knowing who she was. Now you know." Whitmore leaned forward. "This isn't about talent, Monroe. We're not questioning her ability. Aren't you?" Carol felt heat rise behind her ears but kept her expression locked. "We're questioning protocol," Whitmore said. "Regulation. There are channels for advancement. There are evaluations, psychological screenings, medical clearance, flight time." Driscoll nodded. "This is not a movie, Colonel. We don't hand out cockpits based on leaderboard rankings and good instincts." Monroe didn't look at Carol, but she could feel him bracing. He wanted her to speak now, to choose whether this moment defined her or dissolved her. She stepped forward. "I didn't come here today asking for a cockpit," she said. "I came because someone finally asked who Valkyrie was. I've never lied about who I am. I never had the chance to." She paused, searching their faces. "I was rejected from the Air Force Academy 9 years ago," she continued. "The letter said I didn't meet height and G-force resistance criteria. It said I lacked the psychological profile of a combat aviator. But the truth is, I never made it past the waiting room. The officer interviewing me looked me over once and said I didn't have pilot presence, that I should consider logistics or support roles." Whitmore looked uncomfortable now, not defensive, just unprepared for the rawness. "I accepted it," she said. "I took the wrench instead of the yoke. But I never stopped learning. I studied every manual, I read every flight report, and I flew every night in a world where nobody saw my face or heard my voice, just my flying." Driscoll shifted in his seat. "And what exactly do you want now?" "I want to be allowed to keep helping," she said. "Not as a secret, not as a rumor in a forum. I want to train, I want clearance. And if there's a path that exists, any path, I want access to it." Harmon finally spoke again, his voice low but with authority. "You want a commission?" Carol hesitated. "I want an evaluation. If I pass, then yes. Whatever path is required, even if it's not the cockpit. I just want a fair shot." No one spoke for a long moment. Monroe broke the silence. "You're sitting on one of the most underutilized tactical minds on this base, maybe in the whole damn branch. Don't turn this into another example of how bureaucracy buried brilliance." Harmon closed his folder slowly. "Fine," he said. We'll start with controlled assessment. Shadow integration during next week's red flag simulations. She'll coordinate from tactical operations. No fly permissions, no overrides. Observational clearance only. Carol nodded. Understood. Pending evaluation, Harmon added. This remains off the record. Of course, Monroe said. But everyone in the room knew that ship had sailed. After the meeting, Monroe and Carol walked the hall in silence for a while. The hum of base life returned around them. Mechanics, comms officers, junior pilots, rushing from one building to the next. She finally exhaled. You think I made a dent? Monroe smirked. They're not used to getting schooled by someone in coveralls. They'll come around. They stepped outside, the sun hitting them square across the shoulders. A squadron of F-22s launched in formation overhead, their engines roaring like thunder gods above. Carol looked up. She always did, even before all this, but now the sky felt closer, less of a ceiling, more of a possibility. Monroe followed her gaze. You ever actually fly? She smiled faintly. Not outside the sim. Then you'll love what comes next. Later that evening, she sat back down at her desk, the glow of her rig beckoning once again. But this time, she didn't boot the sim. She opened a blank document and started typing something she hadn't let herself write before. A flight school application. This time, not civilian. This time with a letter of recommendation from editor Cole Travis Monroe already attached. Halfway through, a message blinked on her sim feed. It wasn't Ghost. It wasn't one of the usual tags. Good flying today. They won't forget your name again. She didn't recognize the sender, but she smiled, because they were right. The control room looked different this time. Not physically. Same banks of screens, same towers of telemetry monitors, same dusty smell of too many coffee cups left too long on metal counters. But something had shifted. This time, Carol Trezza wasn't standing in the back, she was at the console. Her name was on the roster. She had a badge clipped to her collar that said Tactical Observer Clearance Green, and for the first time she wasn't pretending to belong, she did. Red Flag was the biggest simulation the base had hosted in years. Joint force participants, multi-domain coordination, real-time war games with pressure high enough to mimic combat. The kind of event where careers were made or crushed. She had studied every part of this mission for the last 72 hours. She knew the airspace coordinates better than the map in her childhood home. She knew every squadron's call signs, every backup route, every fallback vector. And in the center of it all, Echo 7, piloted by Havoc, was running tactical lead on the blue team. That was her team now. Monroe stood behind her, arms folded as usual, but this time silent in full confidence. She's in, he told the brass. No more tests. Let her run the show. They hadn't loved the idea, but they didn't push back either, not after her last few saves. Carol had earned her place the hard way, not by asking, not by begging, by performing. The drill was a coordinated strike against a simulated rogue installation. The red team had surprise jammers, satellite disruption tools, and hidden fighters ready to pop up like ghosts. Blue team needed to cut through, secure the zone, and extract a target, all while maintaining formation and avoiding radar traps. The room hummed with controlled tension. Officers moved between stations murmuring updates. Pilots' voices crackled through the comms. Above it all, the master screen showed a top-down radar display. Blue dots moving in tight formation, red pings pulsing at the edge. She leaned forward, hands hovering over her console. Her job wasn't to fly. It was to see, to anticipate, and when she spoke, pilots would listen. Echo 7, shift bearing 12 degrees east. Phantom spike ahead on your current vector. Havoc's voice responded instantly, crisp and composed. Copy, adjusting course. Shadow 1, she continued, eyes flicking to another screen. You've got trailing scatter behind the mountain range. likely bait for a radar trap. Maintain altitude and do not break formation." "Understood." Monroe leaned closer to whisper, "You were born for this." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then the unexpected hit. A screen on the far wall flickered. Signal distortion. The radar scrambled for a moment, then steadied. But something wasn't right. "Signal's degrading," someone called out. "Possible jamming from simulated red base." Carol scanned the interference patterns. It wasn't jamming. It was mimicry. "They're copying transponder signatures," she said. "We've got false positives in the airspace. 2 of those Allied aircraft are decoys." She tapped her headset. "Echo 7, do not trust your rear escort. Break visual and confirm with formation code Charlie Delta 3. Pause. Then, confirmed. Rear escort did not return proper call and response, executing split maneuver. On the master screen, 2 blue dots split, one swinging left, one banking hard west. The second dot followed for a moment, then vanished off-grid. Carol nodded to herself. Target was compromised. Echo 7 is clean. The room was dead silence. Then applause, quick, scattered, but genuine. The lead controller looked up from his station. "Who the hell trained you?" She shrugged slightly. "The Air Force did. They just didn't know it." They were 10 minutes from mission end when the power fluctuation hit. The lights dipped. Consoles buzzed. One of the auxiliary screens went black. A backup generator kicked in. But something was wrong. Comms to Echo 7 cut out mid-transmission. His dot continued to fly, but his voice was gone. "Comms just died," the technician said, eyes wide. "Primary and secondary relays are jammed." "Can we reroute through the ground satellite uplink?" Monroe asked. "Without rebooting." "That's a 90-second cycle." Carol was already moving. Her fingers flew over the console. She isolated the comms channel, bypassed internal encryption, and opened a direct narrowband pulse, a relic of an older system, barely used anymore, but buried deep in the simulator's guts. The technician blinked. "Where did you learn that?" "Same place I learned how to save a falling raptor," she muttered. Static hissed through her headset. Then, barely audible, Havoc's voice. "Faint, but there. Can't read. Heading toward. Unknown contact. Controls are—" "Echo 7, Carol said sharply. "This is Valkyrie. You're not alone up there. Listen to me. You're flying into a no-envelope. You have 40 seconds to react." His breathing came heavy over the line. "I've lost altitude control. The stabilizer's locked." "Not locked," she snapped. "It's looped from the feedback delay. You have to override the FBW and reroute trim through the alternate processor." "And see, its visuals gone." "Left side panel. 3rd row. Blue switch. Count 2 down, flip and hold." A pause. Then holding. Carol tapped the control board again, recalculating pitch and trajectory, using what data she could scrape from the flickering sensors. "You're going to drop 500 feet. It's going to feel like falling. Ride it out." "Copy." The room watched in stunned silence as the blue dot dipped. 1,000 feet, then 500, then leveled. "Stabilized," Havoc said, breathless. "Systems responding, adjusting vector." The room let out a collective breath. Carol slumped slightly in her chair, finally exhaling. Monroe stepped forward. "You just flew that aircraft from a folding chair." "No," she said, adjusting her headset. "He flew it. I just reminded him how—" Later, after the mission wrapped and the room cleared, Carol walked alone down the tarmac, the fading sunlight turning the hangars gold. The sky above was still buzzing from the jets, but her mind was quiet. Havoc found her near the edge of the line. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. She shook her head. "I just wanted to fly." "You did," he said. "Today you flew better than any of us." He looked at her, more serious than she'd ever seen him. They're going to ask questions after this, about what's next, about where you belong. I know. That she met his eyes. I'm done waiting for permission. The envelope came without ceremony, no fanfare, no knock at her door. Just a plain white packet slipped through the mail slot in the early hours of morning, landing face down on the concrete just inside her modest off-base quarters. Carol didn't notice it at first. She was halfway through her morning coffee, barefoot, hair still a tangle of sleep, her brain trying to shake the residue of too many sleepless nights. Then she saw it. Thick, official, the kind of envelope that changed lives. Her heart skipped. Not from fear. Not anymore. She was past fear. She was in the realm of earned confidence, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that simply waits for the world to catch up. She picked it up. Her fingers hesitated just a second at the seal, then broke it open. Inside, one page, no preamble. Carol Trezza. This letter serves as formal notification of your provisional acceptance into the United States Air Force Tactical Operations and Flight Command program. Pending medical clearance and final psych evaluation, you are hereby approved to begin fast-track integration and officer commissioning training. Recommendation provided by T.C. Cordress Travis Monroe. Your first flight evaluation is scheduled for April 17th. Valkyrie's record has reached the surface. Facing USAF Command Review Board. She read it 3 times, her eyes tracking each word like they might vanish if she blinked too fast. When she finally let the page fall to her side, she stood in the stillness of her small room and let out the slowest, deepest breath of her life. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was flying. The hangar felt different now, too. Not because the walls had changed, not because the equipment had shifted, but because of how people looked at her. Not down, not past her, at her. Eyes met hers now, heads nodded. Even Briggs, who had once scoffed at her midnight rig and her silent obsession with the impossible, offered her a quiet fist bump as she passed. "You earned it," he said, voice low. "Not many do." Dana came down from Illinois for her swearing in. She didn't cry, not in front of Carol anyway, but her voice cracked when she pinned the insignia to her sister's collar. "You always belonged in the air," she whispered. "Even before they said yes." Monroe stood by the back wall of the ceremony, arms folded, eyes steady. When Carol found him after, he offered nothing more than a small nod and a quiet, "Don't waste your time being surprised. You were ready the whole damn time." That afternoon she stepped onto the flight line, not as a tech, not as a shadow, but in a crisp uniform bearing her name, her rank, and the legacy she'd carved, with nothing but stubborn brilliance and unwavering discipline. The flight instructors didn't know what to make of her at first. One of them, a stern woman named Major Avery, gave her the kind of once-overs that used to derail her entire day. "You the mechanic who rewired an F-22 mid-sem from a control booth?" Carol didn't blink. "I'm the operator who saw the solution before anyone else did." Avery smiled. "Good. Let's see if you can handle it with the stick in your hand." The first time she slid into the cockpit, she didn't breathe right away. The inside of an F-22 Raptor was more familiar to her than her own apartment, and yet this was different. This wasn't a schematic. It wasn't a routine check. It was hers, for real, for once. Her helmet was snug, her gloves flexed as she gripped the throttle, her fingertips brushing buttons she already knew by muscle memory. "Carol Trezza," the instructor's voice crackled in her headset. "Cleared for taxi. Give me a smooth roll." "Yes, ma'am." The Raptor moved with her like it had been waiting. She was in the air 2 minutes later, wheels up, nose pointed east. Her pulse thudded once, hard, as the G-forces met her body like a handshake from an old rival. But she didn't flinch. Altitude climbed. So did her confidence. At 25,000 feet, she caught herself smiling. "I told you," she whispered to no one, to everyone, to the clouds outside her canopy. "I belong here." It was never about glory, never about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving herself right. She ran the drill perfectly. Tight banks, precision targeting, clean formation alignment. When she touched down 30 minutes later, the ground crew didn't even try to hide their admiration. "She flies like she's been doing it for years," one said to another. "Deal with it." "She has," Monroe muttered, walking past them with a grin. Weeks passed in a rush. Training drills, classroom evaluations, emergency simulations, flight time logged. She passed them all. Not easily, but completely. Not because the process bent for her, but because she'd already done the work in silence for years before they ever let her in the front door. The night before her formal pilot certification, she sat by her rig one last time. She logged into the sim server. Just to see. Ghost_7 was online. She hesitated, then typed one line into the private message box. "You were the first to see me." The reply came instantly. "No, you were the first to let someone." She leaned back, stared at the screen, then shut it off. She didn't need Valkyrie anymore. She had Carol Trezza. On certification day, she stood in front of the same brass that once questioned her presence in a control room. Only this time, they were clapping. Her name was called. She stepped forward. They placed wings on her uniform. And when she turned to face the crowd, she saw something she'd never seen before. Respect. No caveats, no glances toward the door, no clipped tones or lowered eyes. Just earned respect. Outside, the Raptor waited for her. The same one she used to polish with silent envy. Now it was hers. She climbed in, ran pre-flight checks. Then, just before canopy closure, a voice came through on the internal radio. Calm, clean, and unmistakable. "Carol Trezza, this is Tower. You're clear for takeoff. The sky's been waiting." She laughed. The Exodus laughed. And then, with no hesitation, she pushed the throttle forward. The jet screamed down the runway, and the sky, at long last, opened up to meet her.